It's time to increase your bankroll by decreasing your daily fantasy sports learning curve. The Curve with Benny Ricciardi and Josh Kalashi starts now.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Curve here at rotocurve.com. My name is Benny Ricciardi. I go by BRich11 on all the daily fantasy sites, and I'll be walking you through the first part of our show today. We got a big show lined up, big slate tonight, 15 games in the Major League Baseball for FanDuel and DraftKings, Fantasy Aces, anywhere else that you guys are going to be playing tonight. A lot of pitching options, a lot of guys, a lot of bats that we can use tonight, so it's going to be a real exciting night. A lot of big tournaments around the industry. For all those of you who were able to win some of those satellites, get some big tickets, got qualifiers to a lot of the live finals going on, and it's a Friday for MLB. You know, it's one of the big days here, so we're excited. I'm going to go over real quick with you guys our show outline for today. As always, we're going to start with the recap of what we've seen the last 2 days since we last talked on Wednesday. We'll move on to talking a little bit about a couple weather concerns that we have tonight. Go on and go through the Vegas lines a little bit, see what that's telling us. We'll get into pitching, and then I'll bring in my co-host, our pitching guru, Josh Kalachi. He's been on the money the last couple of days with the guys that we should be starting, and we'll talk about that in a minute for a lot of you. I know a lot of you guys are upset. Starting pitching has been real tough this week. You know, a lot of the big studs have been blowing up, and we've had a lot of guys that we thought were going to be locks for those cash games that, you know, turned out not to be the best choices for us. After that, we'll move on and talk about some of the hitters that we're looking at today. A couple games in some parks that usually yield a lot of high runs. We got some high-scoring offenses going in some of those games, so there's definitely going to be some bats that we need some exposure to tonight. And then, as always, Josh and I will give you our cornerstones and the guys that we're using to build our lineups around. So without further ado, we got a lot to get into, so let's get started. First thing I want to do is kind of go over yesterday and kind of talk a couple of you guys off the ledge. There was a lot of people on Twitter, a lot of people in our forums yesterday who were complaining about their starting pitching, and even the day before. And basically, we've had a lot of starting pitchers that have blown up in the last couple of days. You had guys like Chris Archer, Arrieta, Kluber, Cole. I mean, these were all guys who were, 50% plus owned in some of these 50-50s. You know, on paper, they made the most sense. If you followed your process, those were the guys that you probably wound up on. And again, like we always say, you gotta trust in your process. It's not always going to work out for you, but it's not about winning every day. It's about being on the right guys, making the right decisions, and, managing your bankroll in a way that more often than not, you're going to be right. And more often than not, your process is going to lead you to the right place. So even if you had a rough couple days, like I know I had a rough couple days, I haven't, cashed any GPPs in the last 2 or 3 days. A lot of my 50-50s have been on the border. Some of them made it in. Some of them just missed. And a lot of it had to do with some of those guys mentioned. I was on Archer. I was on Arrieta. Kluber was the guy I was able to avoid. But, we were all over Cole the other night. And, stuff like that happens sometimes. I mean, you look at the best you can do is look at the matchup on paper. You look at it. The guy's in a good spot. He has a good splits advantage. He's in a good ballpark. He's been pitching well. If all those things are true, more often than not, that guy's going to come out and have a good game for you. Every once in a while, though, they are going to get blown up. And like I said, I wanted to take this time to talk everybody off the ledge. Now is definitely not the time for you to go crazy, start tilting, throwing extra money into. Stick with your process. If you're a $50 a night player, keep playing that same $50 a night. Keep playing the same splits that you were playing. If you're a $100 a night player, if you're a $1,000 a night player, keep going with your process. And as long as your process is good, you're doing the research, you're looking into it, you're finding the best plays, overall in the long run, it's going to work out for you. You're going to have these spots like now where it seems like everything you do is wrong, but there's also going to be spots later on, maybe in another week or so, where everything you do is right. And you're going to be hitting left and right on all these tournaments. Your pitching is going to be nailing it like it should be. And, the profits are going to start rolling in. So stick with your process, trust in what you're doing. And, like I said, that's baseball. Every once in a while, stuff like that happens. So definitely make sure you're managing that bankroll. If you're going all in every night, then you're not doing it right. You should be using a percentage of your bankroll, playing that same percentage. If you have a couple losing days, you stick with whatever that percentage was. Maybe that means a little bit less money going in if you had some losses over the last couple days. But as long as you stick to the percentages and stick to what you're doing, you're going to be fine in the long run. Couple other things about yesterday. We've had a couple big explosions by a couple bats. So if anybody's been playing in some of these big tournaments, you'll notice that stacking has definitely been something that's been paying off. Texas and Minnesota bats especially putting up double-digit scores over the last couple days. You know, those are a couple offenses that are usually underutilized in daily fantasy. So there were definitely, definitely a couple people who benefited from using those guys in the last couple days. That Texas team is starting to get hot right now. They're hitting pretty well. Again, I wasn't one of the people who thought that was a reason you should be off some of the stud pitchers going against them. But after seeing the results, I think you got to start looking at some of the bats in that offense as well. And Minnesota's in the same boat. I mean, Minnesota's had a couple games now in the past week where they put up some big run lines. So maybe that offense is starting to hit a little bit. So we got to keep those guys in mind. But at the same point in time, like I said, keep trusting in your process, keep doing what you're doing. What else did we have the last couple of days? We have Jock Peterson hit another couple of home runs. We called him the other day. He had two big ones for me on Wednesday to save my teams that I had Garrett Cole on. So I owe him a drink if I ever see him in a bar one day. Mike Trout went yard again yesterday. He's starting to heat up again. I mean, that guy's one of the best players in baseball. So you can never be surprised about anything that he does. And some people said he got lucky the other night because his BVP was bad, but I saw something on Twitter. Somebody had a great line. I wish I could give credit, but they basically said, yeah, Mike Trout gets lucky a lot. And that's about as true as it could be over the last couple of years. So those are some of the things that we saw over the last couple nights. I don't want to harp on it too much because, like I said, we got a lot to get into today. So let's move on, start talking about a couple weather issues. There are a couple weather issues today. I don't think either one of these games is going to wind up getting canceled, but there are a couple things that we want to look at. The White Sox-Cincy game has a 56% chance of rain. That game's taking place in Chicago. It's going to be a little windy, going to be a little rainy over there, but it looks like they should be able to get the game in. There is like I said, there is a 56% chance of rain, but it doesn't look like it's going to be something that causes a rain out. The one that I'm a little more worried about, again, is the Dodgers and Colorado. 67% chance of rain in Colorado for that one, and that's going to be a big deal because both of the pitchers in this game aren't all that great. So there's going to be a lot of bats. There's definitely a lot of bats in this game that people are going to be targeting. And if that's the case, and there's going to be bats that people are targeting, obviously you want to make sure that they're going to get this game in. It does seem like they're going to have a window to get it in. There may be some starts and stops. But again, I care more about starts and stops when we're talking about starting pitching. Basically, the idea behind that, a little teaching point for us today, you want to avoid playing pitchers in a game where it looks like the rain might cause it to be starts and stops, because if that guy goes 5 or 6 innings and then there's a 2-hour delay, it's very likely he's not going to come back out and keep pitching when the delay is over. So when you have a starting pitcher that you want to use in a game like that, it's definitely a reason to be a little bit more cautious, especially in your cash games, because if you get a guy, I mean, he could go out there and be throwing a gem for 4 or 5 innings. Well, let's say 4 innings. If he goes 4 innings throwing a gem and then there's a 2-hour rain delay, and when they come out of the rain delay, they put a relief pitcher in for him. Now, that guy's only going to have that 4 innings of work and whatever he did in those 4 innings of work, and he's not even going to qualify for a win. So as great as that matchup might be, and as well as that guy might have been pitching, he's not going to wind up paying off for you in that situation. On the flip side, though, for the bats, it really doesn't matter to me if there's a delay for the bats, because the guys who were in the lineup before are usually the guys who are still going to be in the lineup after the delay. Very few times do you sub out a positional player. It's usually the pitcher that goes, because they don't want a guy throwing and then sitting for 2 hours and then coming back out there and throwing again. He's going to have to warm up all over again. He's going to have to get himself going. But as far as the bats, I mean, they just roll the same bats right out there. So I don't think that's going to be a big issue at all. So I wouldn't really worry too much about that. So if you are on some of these bats, which to be honest, you should be in this Dodgers and Rockies game, I still think you can be on these bats, even if it does look like there's a delay. The only thing I would worry about is if they're saying that they, might not have a window to get the game in. But again, I'm not a weatherman, but from looking at what I see, it looks like there's going to be a 2 to 3 hour window where they could get it in, even if they do have to delay the start or if they have to stop it, a little bit after they start the game. The only real wind concern today, there is 12-mile-an-hour winds in San Francisco that's blowing straight out. Now, San Francisco is a pretty big park, so I don't think it's going to be a huge upgrade. It's not like the wind is blowing out in Wrigley Field and, we see the line move. I mean, the line on this game has basically stayed exactly the same, even with the 12-mile-an-hour winds blowing out. It's not an easy park to hit home runs in the beginning. And really the only guy, Josh and I were talking before the show, the only guy it's really going to help is going to be Giancarlo Stanton. And honestly, he can hit the ball 450 feet with the wind blowing 50 miles an hour in his face anyway. So it's not really going to make a difference to him. If he gets a hold of one, he gets a hold of one. And, that's usually the way it works anyway. So that's really the only win situation today. So there's not a lot of weather concerns. The big one is obviously that Dodgers game. I don't think too many people are going to be on a ton of guys in that White Sox-Cincy game, although Cincy has a pretty good matchup against Hector Noesi today. But the Dodgers-Colorado game is definitely one we got to monitor because I know there's going to be a lot of bats in that game that everybody's going to be looking at on one side or the other. So that's basically where we're where we're looking for those games. We also have a couple Vegas lines that we wanted to talk about today. The Mets and the Philadelphia Phillies is the lowest scoring game on the day. Run line total there is 6.5. That's two good pitchers going up in that matchup. We have Matt Harvey going for the Mets and Cole Hamels going for the Phillies. Hamels hasn't been spectacular this year, but he's still a very, very solid pitcher. Even in his bad games, he's still better than, more than half the guys that you're going to be rolling out or that other teams are going to be rolling out that night. So Hamels is solid. I don't know if I like him all that much today because he is going up against Harvey. And, his offense has basically been putrid. So Harvey is definitely a guy who's going to be in play. We'll talk about him a little more later. One of the big problems I have with Harvey, though, if you look at his game logs, they're really trying to protect his arm. He hasn't gone over 95 pitches only once so far this season. So that's something to keep in mind. There's a couple other games that have run lines of 7. St. Louis and Pittsburgh is one of those. You got Liriano and Waka in that matchup. So 2 other really good pitchers going in that one. The Miami and San Francisco game, which is played in San Francisco. Again, if you look at where most of these games are being played, the Philly game is in a hitter's park. Actually, they're playing that one in Philadelphia. But the other game in St. Louis and this game in San Francisco, again, like we always say, those are 2 big pitchers' parks. Whenever you have games in the pitchers' parks, you're usually going to see lower run lines on it. So this is a matchup between Lincecum and Jared Cosart in this Miami-San Francisco game. So that's another one that they're not expecting a lot of runs out of. And the last one is Oakland and Seattle. The Oakland and Seattle game, you have Taijuan Walker, who has been hit or miss. He's had a couple pretty solid starts and a couple just absolutely putrid starts where he's gotten lit up. And he's going up against Sonny Gray, who's been basically lights out so far this year. And again, he's another guy that we'll talk about in a minute when we get into the pitchers. As for the high run games, that Cincinnati-Chicago White Sox game that we were talking about, they're expecting 9 runs over there. I think that has a lot to do with Jason Marquis and Hector Noesi going up against each other. Neither one of those guys has been lights out lately. Those are 2 pitchers that, have been known to give up some runs in the past. Obviously, the Colorado game against LA Dodgers is another one. That's a 10.5 run line right now. You have a matchup between Brett Anderson going up in that one against Eddie Butler at the moment. So you got the lefty on the hill for the Dodgers going up against some of those big righty bats for the Rockies. And you got a righty on the hill for Colorado going up against some of those big home run hitting lefty bats that the Dodgers have been rolling out there later. So 10.5 seems like a lot of runs, but honestly, I could even see that one going over. No matter what happens in that game, I definitely think you're going to see some runs. So that's one that we're probably going to want some exposure to on the day. If we're looking at pitching, there's actually a lot of big favorites on the day. I'm only going to go over some of the biggest ones because that's how many we have. There's a couple aces on the mound and a couple big favorites. Gio Gonzalez is a -190. He's another guy we'll talk about in a minute when we get into pitching. He's got a matchup against Eric Stoltz, who is basically a gas can guy that we used to target against last year. So I definitely think that Gio's in a good spot to get the win today. Some of the other big favorites that we see on the board, you have, Brett Anderson is a -140. You have David Price as a -140 against Kansas City. That's an interesting game. Josh and I are both going to give you our ideas on David Price today. Anybody who looks at the game log and sees what he did against Kansas City might get excited about his prospects today. But just curb your enthusiasm on him for a minute, and we'll get to that on our reasons why. Some of the other guys to look at, Trevor Bauer is a -145 favorite. He's going up against Mike Pelfrey. You guys know how much I love Mike Pelfrey. I think that he's one of the guys you want to be targeting today. He's not a very good pitcher anymore. He basically gives it up to both sides of the plate, doesn't have a lot of upside with him. So I can definitely see why Bauer would be a big favorite in that one. And the last guy who's a big favorite today, and this one doesn't make much sense to me, but Jared Weaver is minus 140 as well right now. He's basically not a great pitcher anymore. He does throw strikes. He throws them very slow. His pitches are very hittable. But for some reason, they really think that he has a good chance to win this game. I think it has more to do with the fact he's going up against Roberto Hernandez, Fausto Carmona, whatever name he's going by these days. And Carmona Hernandez has not been all that good this year. So that kind of gives you the rundown of the Vegas lines and what we've seen with those. So we're going to move on and start talking about some of the pitching today. There's a lot of guys that are in play today, about 5 or 6 up top and a couple other guys that are further down. I'm going to give you my thoughts on some of them and then bring Josh in as our pitching guru to, give you some more of the advanced stats. The first guy that I want when we get into starting pitchers today is going to be Francisco Liriano. Liriano has been really good so far this year. He's got a 1.95 ERA. He has a whip of 0.95, and he has 34 strikeouts in 32 innings of work. He's going to be at home, so he's in a pitcher-friendly park today. And he goes up against a Cardinals team that has really struggled against left-handed pitching. The Cardinals are about the 7th worst batting average in the league. They're in the bottom third. I don't know how they did yesterday. I looked at it before their last 2 games were put in. But they're in the bottom third of the league in batting average against left-handed pitching. And more importantly, for why I like Liriano today, they have a 24.4% strikeout rate against left-handed pitching. So Liriano should be in a position where he's going to have at least a decent amount, if not an above average amount of strikeouts. And again, this is a guy who averages a strikeout per inning anyway. So I could definitely see him going 7 innings today, getting, 8, 9, 10 strikeouts against this Cardinals team. I also think that it neutralizes a lot of the big bats on the Cardinals. You have a lot of left-handers up on top of that Cardinals order who do a lot of damage for them. You got guys like Carpenter, guys like Matt Adams, Colton Wong hitting in the 2 spots sometimes. When you have all these guys up there towards the top of the order that bat lefty, and you can put a solid lefty in there that can neutralize left-handed batters, it's definitely going to give the Cardinals trouble. And that's actually why the Cardinals have struggled a little bit this year against left-handed pitching, because they don't have a lot of other right-handed bats that they can bring in. Normally, when they go up against a left-handed pitcher, you got Matt Holliday up there towards the top of the order. They usually wind up moving up Johnny Peralta. Sometimes Peralta even bats cleanup when they go up against left-handed pitching. But again, if those are the kind of guys, that you're relying on to do all your damage, they're not bad players, but they're not superstars. They're not studs. They're not bats that are really gonna scare me off a guy like Liriano. If it was a middle tier or a lower tier left-handed pitcher, maybe. But Liriano has some nasty stuff, and he's been pitching well this year. Plus, he pitches very well when he's at home in Pittsburgh. So I definitely think he's got a chance for a low-run game, a low-hit game, a high strikeout game. And he's been going about 7 innings or so, if not more, in all his starts. So he's definitely a guy I think has some upside today. He's about 8,600 on FanDuel, and I think he's a little pricier than that on DraftKings. But I think that he's still in the value slot. He's about the 5th or 6th highest priced pitcher on both sites today. So I definitely think Liriano is a guy that I'm going to be rolling out there in my cash games, and definitely have him in a couple of my tournament lineups as well. Another guy I want to talk about is somebody who I think people are kind of sleeping on a little bit, which is why I really like him for tournaments, and I even like him for cash today, and that's Gio Gonzalez. Gonzalez is a lefty, and he's going up against the Braves today. As we all know, the Braves have a bunch of lefties at the top of their lineup that a lot of people have been using, and those guys have been producing. Guys like Markakis, guys like Freeman, guys like AJ Pierzynski, Kelly Johnson. They've all been cheap. They've all been producing pretty well. And Gio Gonzalez is a lefty, so he's going to be able to neutralize some of those guys. The biggest stat that I like about Gio Gonzalez, as I was looking through it yesterday, he has advanced metrics in his favor that say that he's probably due for an uptick in his production. One of the stats that I usually like to look at is something called batting average on balls in play. You can hear it. Some people call it BABIP. It's basically the acronym that they use to, take the first letter of all those words and put it together. But his batting average on balls in play right now is 391, which is insanely high. Over his career, it's closer to a 290 is what he has over, the course of his career. So basically, people would say that he's been getting unlucky. All the balls that people have been putting in play against him have been finding the right holes, have been finding the open spots, and guys have been getting on base. That's a number that usually stays close to where it has been. So when that number does regress to the mean, it's going to help bring down some of his walks and hits per game, his hits per game that he's been giving up. One of the problems that Gio Gonzalez has had so far this year is that his whip is kind of high. He's been letting a lot of guys get on base. The more guys you get on base, the more chances somebody has to get a hit and drive somebody in. Somebody hits a home run, they wind up bringing in 2 runs or 3 runs instead of only 1. So that's been some of the problems that Gio's had so far. His last game, he wound up coming out there and putting it all together. He threw a great game last time out. Again, he has high strikeout upside. He's playing against the Braves, who are that great. He's at home in Washington, which is a pitcher's park. So he's another guy in that mid-tier around 5th to 7th most expensive guys that I think definitely has some upside today and is somebody that you want to look at. Now, there are a couple really expensive pitchers today, and I'm going to talk about 3 of them right now. Those 3 are David Price, Matt Harvey, and Sonny Gray. All 3 of these guys have some upside, and they also have some warts with them. So I'm going to tell you what I think of each one of them and who I would play in cash and who I wouldn't. The first guy I want to talk about is David Price. Now, to me, Price is a guy who I am going to be fading today. He goes up against the Kansas City Royals offense, and if you look at his game log, you're going to see on 5-2, he pitched against the Royals. So basically last week, what are we on today? Friday. So I guess it was about last Thursday, he went up against the Royals. Complete game, 9 innings pitched, 5 hits, 1 run, but he only had 3 strikeouts. And the 1 run he had was actually a late inning home run to Lorenzo Cain, who, basically hit a rocket off of him. And the reason why I think that Price is a guy you want to stay away from today, as we said, the Royals are not a team that strikes out a lot. You can see that in Price's last start, where he only had 3 strikeouts going a complete game. He got 27 outs, only 3 of them were by strikeouts. And even with that game, and as good as he pitched in that game, he only wound up with 27 DraftKings points. Now, the problem with that is when you're playing on DraftKings and you get a complete game, you actually get a bonus for that complete game. Plus, you get a bonus for the win at the end of the game. So even with the win bonus and the complete game bonus, Price still didn't really make value for a guy who basically pitched about as well as he can. I mean, you can't really expect him to go out there and pitch better than a 5-hit, 1-run, basically shutout for about 7 innings until he gave up that home run. He really only made 1 mistake on a day, pitched about as well as he possibly could, and still barely got you to, solid cash game value. And he was definitely below what you would have needed out of him in order to really be up there in a GPP, in those big tournaments that you play. So going up against this Kansas City Royals team again, I could see him having a low number of strikeouts again today. That Royals team does have the best batting average in the league, so I don't expect them to, struggle for hits every time they go out there. And there's also a little thing that, Josh is going to talk about guys going up against a team for a second time in a short period of time and how they have done with it. And I'll let him get into that when he starts talking pitching. But basically, if a team has seen somebody recently and they get to see him again, there's a good chance that they're going to do better now that they know what to look for. It's, not something that we have hard stats to back up, but we have seen it happen a bunch of times already this year. And there's a couple situations today where we're going to be looking at it again. And as I said, I'll let Josh get into that because he's our pitching guru and can explain it a lot better than I can. The next guy we're going to talk about is Matt Harvey. I mean, Matt Harvey's a stud. He's been pitching really well this year. He easily has a floor of about 20 points today against the Philadelphia Phillies team. The one drawback against starting guys against the Phillies is they don't strike out a ton. But again, I mean, Harvey's a big strikeout guy, so they're not striking out a ton against middle-of-the-road pitchers. But I still think that Harvey's going to be able to dial it up and get a couple strikeouts today. This Philly offense has basically been putrid this year. They're one of the lowest scoring teams in the league. They have one of the worst batting averages in the league. They do put the ball in play a decent amount of times, but a lot of it is weak ground balls to second base, to shortstop, to third base. They don't have a lot of power. They have a couple guys who are banged up, a couple guys who are injured, a couple guys who are just old. And, Harvey is in about as good a matchup as he can be. I would have rather seen it be at home in Citi Field than in Citizens Bank Park. As we all know, Citizens Bank Park is a place that yields a lot of runs and a lot of home runs. But still, I mean, Harvey's been so good this year, and guys just haven't been getting the good part of the bat on the ball against him. So I definitely think that Harvey's in a good spot. He's a solid cash game play for me today, but I don't think he has GPP upside. And the reason why I say that is if you look at his game log, only once has he gotten past 95 pitches. They're definitely still protecting this guy's arm. And a testament to how good Harvey has been is even only throwing 95 pitches, he's basically getting through at least 7 or 8 innings in every one of the starts. So that tells you how much of a stud this guy is. But again, because he's so important to that Mets team, they're kind of limiting his arm a little bit. You know, he's a guy that when he gets to 95 pitches, they're pretty much looking to finish the inning and then pull him out, put a pinch hitter in for him, or, you know, start getting somebody up in the bullpen. Not that that's a bad thing at all. Like I said, I still think he's going to pitch well. But if you're taking a guy who's as expensive as he is, he's the top price option, I think, on both FanDuel and DraftKings today. You really want to make sure you have a guy who's going to go deep into the game, because if he doesn't go deep into the game, he's going to have trouble getting you to the point value that you need to really make him pay off. So as I said, for cash games, I think he's safe. I think he's going to give you a safe 20 points on DraftKings. I think he's safe for 15 or 16 points over on FanDuel. But if you're looking for huge upside, I don't know if he has that today against this Phillies team. And I don't know if he has it if he's not going to be throwing, you know, more than 95 pitches, basically. The last guy that I want to mention of the top studs is Sonny Gray. Sonny Gray has been spectacular so far. He's got a 1.67 ERA and a whip of only 0.95. He's got a 182 batting average against, which is one of the best in the league for starters in the American League. He has 35 strikeouts in 42 innings, so he is able to dial it up and get some strikeouts. He's not considered a huge strikeout pitcher. You know, he's not a guy who's probably going to go out there and fan 10 or 12 batters. But if he goes 7 innings, you know, he basically is a lock for at least 5 or 6 strikeouts. And he goes up against the Seattle team today that does have some lefty bats that you want to be concerned about. But Cano hasn't really been hitting all that well this year. And Seager is starting to come on a little bit, but he's definitely not taking the step forward that people have thought he would as well. You always got to be worried about Nelson Cruz and his boomstick, but he actually prefers left-handed pitching, so it's a bad splits matchup for him, although not a horrible one. So there's definitely a lot of upside to using Gray today. Excuse me. He plays in Seattle, so that ballpark is definitely a pitcher-friendly ballpark, and he's a big favorite. So you got a lot of things going in your favor when you're looking at Sonny Gray. If you need to get some of those cheap pitchers, if you're playing in a tournament, there's 2 guys that I want to throw out there. Take a look at Miguel Gonzalez. His last start against the Yankees on April 14th, he was spectacular. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to do that again today. He is a right-handed pitcher going up against a pretty lefty-heavy lineup. They are playing in Yankee Stadium, where lefties tend to hit the ball pretty well. Definitely tend to hit the ball with power really well in Yankee Stadium. So, like I said, he's one of those GPP kind of plays where he could have some upside, or he could also wind up getting lit up. Another guy who falls in that same boat is Jimmy Nelson. Nelson is a high strikeout guy, cheap all over, and he plays a Cubs team that has really, basically struggled a little bit with right-handed pitchers. The Cubs strike out an absolute ton, and especially against right-handed pitching have they been striking out a ton. They lead the league in strikeouts against right-handed pitching up to this point in the season, but they do also have some explosive upside. So, like I said, those are guys that you might want to take a look at if you're looking for a cheap option in a tournament. But for your cash games today, you want to stick to the guys like Gray, guys like Harvey, guys like Gio, guys like Francisco Liriano. There's a lot of options. There's a lot of different ways you can go. So wait till lineups come out, see if any of those lineups are weak, have some of the stars sitting, and make your choices from there. But that's basically how I see pitching today. I'm going to kick it over to my co-host, our pitching guru, Josh Kalachi. Josh, what do you see on the pitching front today? I mean, you've been nailing it all week, so let's see if we can keep it going for the people.
Hey, guys, I just have one quick comment. I know you talked about Gio Gonzalez a little bit earlier. Gonzalez has, like you just said, a very high batting average per balls in play. It's at 391, as you just mentioned. But he's definitely due towards progression because he has a high ground ball rate of about 58%. So what that means is he's getting ground balls, but with those batting average per balls in play being high, those balls are just sneaking through. That's something you don't have to worry about. He's definitely working his way towards the mean, which means he's going to be getting better. Those numbers in baseball always end up equaling out, and that's something that you definitely want to take a look at in terms of when you're searching for your pitchers. Some other pitchers I like today I'll get to in a minute, but I just wanted to do a little bit of a teaching point about how I do my research each day. A lot of people have asked me how I find these pitchers and how I'm looking for different things. So I'm going to bring up a screen share here on Fangraphs. I showed you guys a few shows ago about how to use that, but I'm going to show you guys exactly how I do my research here for Fangraphs. You see this right here. How I got to this was I went over to leaders and to batting leaders in 2015. So it brings up this big part of the web page here, and you can click on team stats. What this does is it brings up all these different statistics that a team is doing against opposing pitching. So when you go here, what I do is I will go to split and then search by righty, first right-handed pitching. What this enables you to do is see all of the opposing teams and what they do against right-handed pitching. Now, all these stats, you don't need all this kind of stuff. That's one of the great things about Fangraphs, that you can scroll all the way down to custom leaderboards and select what you like. Now, I'm just going to X out all of these here and bring up the kind of the two main ones that I use. I use a few other ones, but just for the sake of this this segment, we're just going to bring up K percentage, strikeout percentage, and batting average. So if you go to create custom table here, and it still maintains the team stat filter and against the right-handed teams against right-handed pitching, it brings you all of their batting averages and their strikeout rates against the right-handed pitching. So the way that I like to do it is I like to sort by strikeout percentage, because that's something that we always target, especially when we're talking about pitching, and as those strikeouts can really tally up those fantasy points. And as Benny just said, the Cubs are striking out the most against right-handed pitching. Now, the way I look at this is you see, oh, the Cubs and the Astros are striking out a lot. They're hitting 246, 247. That's a good split matchup for me. That means I would be targeting right-handed pitchers against the Cubs and against the Astros. Now, you see a team like the Orioles, who are also striking out a lot, but they're hitting 265 against right-handed pitching. So you take this into account along with some other numbers like slugging percentage, and this is kind of how I find my pitchers for the day. Now, there are some thresholds that I like to maintain, and that's a batting average of 250 or below and a strikeout rate of at least 20%. There's a few outliers where I'll select a team below that, but that's just based on a given matchup. Whether a team has some guys, some bench players starting, like the Brewers will have some guys like Ryan Braun and guys like Chris Davis sitting, and when their backups come in, it makes for a better matchup. So that's just a good way to begin your research for pitching. That's how I do mine as well. So I'm going to end this screen share here, and I'm going to talk about some pitchers that I like for today. Now, doing that research I just showed you guys, it brought up about 7 or 8 pitchers for me, guys like Jimmy Nelson, Jared Weaver, Jason Hamill, Giovanni Gallardo, guys like that. Now, we don't like all those guys, and there's reasons behind that. Even though they did show up in the research, you don't want to take a pitcher that's less than average. You don't want to take guys like Jared Weaver or Giovanni Gallardo because they're not good pitchers. Regardless of matchups, they're still major league hitters, and major league hitters are going to be able to feast on poor pitching, and that's exactly what's happened to guys like Jared Weaver today. Guys that I do like, we'll get into that now. I like Matt Harvey a lot for obvious reasons. Benny maintained the discussion about him earlier, talking about how he's a high strikeout guy and the Phillies don't do well against right-handed pitching. He did mention, though, that the Phillies don't strike out much, which is definitely a thing, that they're not striking out too much, but they're still getting a lot of outs and a lot of outs frequently against right-handed pitching. They're hitting just 210 against right-handers, and they're slugging just 310, which means that they're only getting 3.1 bases per at bat, which is just not a good ratio for any team, especially when they're only hitting just 210. Now, Benny talked about they're not striking out much. We don't have to worry about that with Matt Harvey because he's one of the best strikeout artists in the major leagues. He's a guy that uses 4 pitches and 4 pitches very well. A lot of major league pitchers have 1 great pitch, 2 decent pitches, and maybe another pitch they throw every now and then. Harvey has what we call 4+ pitches. He has a fastball in the mid-90s. He can pump it into the high 90s. I know 2 starts ago, he had a 101-mile-an-hour fastball in the 8th inning, which is just absurd. He throws a curveball, he throws a changeup, and he has a nice slider. But one reason why you can keep guys off balance and why I like him today in terms of striking out the Phillies hitters, even though they don't strike out much, is the difference in his curveball and fastball is 13 miles an hour. For those of you who played baseball, if you're seeing 95-mile-an-hour fastball and that curveball comes in at 82, you're not going to be ready for it. It's going to cause you to kind of reach out and try to fight it off for a foul ball. Harvey's curveball breaks about 18 inches, I believe, which is very hard to catch up to, especially after seeing that 95-mile-an-hour fastball. And that's how he generates strikeouts, and that's a big reason why I'm targeting him today. Another strikeout artist I like a lot today is Trevor Bauer. He faces the Twins, who, as Benny said earlier, have been hitting the ball very well lately. That offense is starting to click. But they've done a lot of their damage against left-handed pitching. We saw with Kazmir the other day. I think they put up 6 or 7 runs on him. They scored 13 for the game. But why I like Bauer is because the Twins strike out 23% of the time of their at-bats against right-handed pitching so far this year. And Bauer's a guy that's had control issues in the past in his career, but he has always had great stuff. He's always had a fastball with a lot of movement, has an excellent slider. And that slider is the main reason why I'm using him today, because he's throwing that slider a lot more this season. In the past, he's thrown it about 10 to 15% of his pitches across a game, which Bauer usually ends up around 100 pitches or more because he works deep in the count. So that means he's only throwing about 15 sliders max per game. But this year, he's throwing about 25% sliders, which has given him a high chance to strike guys out, and that's exactly what he's done. I believe he has 2 games of double-digit strikeouts, and considering he's facing the Twins today, who strike out a lot against right-handed pitching, he's a guy that I'm targeting, especially with that strikeout pitch. One other guy that I'm looking at is strictly a tournament play for me, and that's Jason Hammel against the Brewers. The Brewers are hitting .233 against right-handed pitching, which is very low, and if you look at their strikeout rate, they're also striking out in the top 5 most often against right-handed pitchers. But if you take a look at what the Brewers have done lately, I believe in the last 2 weeks they've allowed 3 or 4 pitchers to have at least 30 fantasy points. And most of the games they're allowing at least 20 fantasy points or more. So you're getting a good matchup nearly every day against a pitcher that has some good stuff. But that's the main reason why I can't use Hammel in my 50-50s and head-to-heads, because he's a 2-pitch pitcher. And what that means is he throws his fastball. I believe his other pitch is a slider. But if they can find out those 2 pitchers, if those hitters see that in the first or second time around, they're going to see that and recognize the spin, which means that they're not going to be able to get a chance to Hamel's not going to be able to strike out a lot of batters, and that's a big thing, and that's why I can't use him in my 50-50s and head-to-heads, because that third time through the order, he tends to struggle a lot, and if the pitcher can't get through that third time in the order, he's limited to about 5 or 6 innings. That's just not exactly what we want to get in our 50-50s and head-to-heads, but we want at least 20 points on DraftKings and about 10 on FanDuel. There's one other pitcher I do like today. He didn't show up on my original research I described to you, but you always got to look at other things like the Vegas lines, like the over-unders, and that's what led me to Tim Lincecum today. He's strictly a tournament-only play as well, but he's a little bit cheaper than these Matt Harveys, than the David Prices, than the Gio Gonzalez's of the world, and that allows you to spend more on hitters. Now, the reason why I like Lincecum today is because he is a favorite in a low-scoring game, which that means Vegas really thinks that he's going to pitch well today, give up 2 or 3 runs. But why does he pitch well? I mean, he had ERA, I believe, below 3 this year. In the past, Lincecum has been a guy that has just blazed a fastball by people, 94, 95. Has that nice, real small frame, but a huge delivery where he almost jumps off the mound. He doesn't dominate hitters with his fastball anymore. He's going to have to be more of a finesse guy with his fastball topping out at about 88 miles an hour. Every now and then he can get to 90, but that's a big difference between guys like him and Bauer and Harvey. That extra 7 miles an hour, it doesn't mean too much against major league hitters. But what Lincecum's able to do is he throws his curveball and his changeup more often than he ever has. I believe his changeup's up over 10% more than what he's thrown his entire career, which is a big ratio. Now, righties have hit him decently well so far this year. I believe they're hitting over 260 against him. But lefties are struggling mightily, and that's something we talked about a few days ago. Because of a changeup from a right-handed pitcher, those lefties have it's hard for them to get around on it because they're expecting a fastball, and a changeup from a righty always goes away from left-handed pitching. And with Lincecum throwing that a lot this year, that's why lefties are hitting just 173 against him. So I like Lincecum against the Marlins team that they always like to see that fastball. And with Lincecum throwing a changeup more, throwing his slider more, he might be able to keep them off balance, go deep into the game, and get a few strikeouts. That brings us to the last pitcher today, and I don't like him even in the least bit, and I'll tell you why. That's Jimmy Nelson against the Chicago Cubs. Nelson is in one of these odd places this year. This is his 6th start. His first 2 starts were against the Pittsburgh Pirates. His second 2 starts were against the Cincinnati Reds. And now his 5th, last start, and the start today are against the Cubs. This guy has seen the same team twice in the week, all 3 times through these through every 2 starts. And we'll explain what that means. Yes, the Cubs have a high strikeout rate. Nelson can strike out a lot of batters. But they just saw Nelson 5 days ago. And that's one of the things that Benny talked about earlier. When hitters see Major League pitching 2 or 3 times through the order, that 4th time they're going to recognize the ball. Especially when they see these guys the second time in a week. They're going to be able to see the ball well out of their hand. They know what they're looking for. And we're going to take a look at the numbers of why that happened to Jimmy Nelson. His first start of the season against Pittsburgh, he threw a gem. He had about 30 fantasy points, got the win. 5 days later, he faced Pittsburgh and got lit up. They saw the ball well off him. His next start was against the Reds. Performed very well again. I believe he had close to 20 DraftKings points, threw 7 or 8 innings, had a few strikeouts. But then 6 days later, he saw the Reds again and got lit up. Next start was against the Cubs, who he's facing today. Pitched a gem last time. Threw very well. Had over 30 fantasy points. Was one of the top pitchers in the week. I believe we were talking about him with that strikeout rate. But guess who he faces today? The Cubs again. This third time's not a charm for Jimmy Nelson. And it brings us to that old adage, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, shame on you. That's one of those things that happens again. This is the third time. I'm not on Jimmy Nelson because this is a big trend here. The second time he's seen a team in a week, he gets shelled, and that's going to happen once again today, I believe. The reason why this happens to Nelson, he only has 2 pitches, and we just talked about that before with Harvey, with Bauer. These guys throw different pitches that can keep guys off balance. And that's why I think Nelson is getting shelled in his second time against the team in the span of 1 week, because just those 2 pitchers, a major league hitter is going to be able to figure those out. It's just a fastball and a curveball for Nelson. He's not throwing any other pitchers more than 10% of the time, so you don't have to worry about that. They're going to recognize that curveball out of his hands, and every major league hitter can hit a fastball. And that's exactly what's happened to Jimmy Nelson in the second start. And that's what we're going to see today against the Cubs. So stay away from Nelson. It might be a good day to target some Cubs hitters. I know we're going to talk about that soon. Benny, do you have anything else on pitchers for today?
No, that pretty much sums up all the pitching. We gave you guys a lot of information on pitching today. We did that on purpose because of, basically how bad the pitching has been the past couple of days and how much it has cost people a lot of money. So we wanted to make sure we got as in-depth as we could with the stats to give you guys as much information as you can so you can try to make the informed decisions tonight and, get yourself back on track after we've all had a couple of those guys that blew up on us in the last couple of days. But again, with pitching, that's only part of the equation. Right now, we're going to move on, talk about some of the hitters. And then Josh and I are going to give you our cornerstones and the guys that we're building lineups around. We probably won't have time for a mailbag today. There was too much stuff that we wanted to get into the show. But again, you could always go over to the forums at rotocurve.com. Josh, myself, Mike Rathburn, the 3 of us are always around there. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them on the forum. When it gets closer to lineup block, you guys know we're always in chat answering questions and bouncing stuff off each other. So feel free to go over there, sign up, and get yourself into the conversation. Make sure you sign up for an account. This way you can start accruing your curve points. And as we told you before, those curve points, you can trade them in for Roto Curve merchandise. You can trade them in for extra money to play on some of these sites. So if you don't have an account yet, make sure you do sign up and come over and join us and, check it out. It's free. There's a lot of information over there that'll help you guys. And, as always, our goal is to get you over that curve so you become profitable. But now we're going to move on, talk about some hitters. We're going to start at the catcher position. There are 2 guys that I like at the catcher position today. The first one I want to talk about is Russ Martin. Martin has been on fire this week. He's been making people money left and right. He's been moved up in the order. He's batting anywhere between 2nd and 5th in that Toronto order right now. Gets a matchup at home in the Rogers Center, hitter-friendly park, going up against Wade Miley. Wade Miley, some people will look at his numbers and say that he has reverse splits. And it's true. The lefties have been hitting him well, but righties have been hitting him well too. So it's not like the splits are extreme where right-handers are struggling with him and lefties are dominating him. I mean, he's basically given up shots to guys on both sides of the plate. And one of the problems that Miley has had is he's been getting tagged for a lot of home runs lately. So playing in the Rogers Center, right-handed bats going up against a pitcher who gives up a lot of home runs, basically all those right-handed bats on the Blue Jays are guys that we're going to be wanting to target today. Martin is one of the few catchers who has a good spot in the order. Best case scenario, he's hitting 2nd or 3rd. Worst case scenario, he's probably hitting 5th. So he's definitely somebody I think we should have our eyes on. I'm just going to give you his last 5-game daily fantasy scores for the week. 9.5, 7.25, 4, 9.75, and 8.75 on FanDuel. If you can get a guy who can do that for you on FanDuel over the course of a week and you rostered him every day, you've probably been making money every day this week if you had Russ Martin in your lineup. So I'm not going to stop that. If Russ Martin is playing tonight, Russ Martin's going to be one of the guys that I put in a lot of my lineups. Now, he is a little bit pricey. He's up on FanDuel. He's up at about $3,900. I think he's over $4,000 on DraftKings today. But again, you're paying up for the production and the consistency that he's been showing. And I think that he can keep that going today with the matchup that he has. Another catcher that I like today is Yasmani Grandal. As you guys know, he's going to be playing. He's getting a park bump because he's moving to Colorado. They're playing against the Rockies today. He gets to go up against Eddie Butler, who's kind of a gas can right-handed pitcher. Butler is a young pitcher, hasn't been in the league very long, but he has been getting tagged for a lot of home runs. I think the stat I saw was 13 home runs and 57 innings of pitching so far in the major leagues. And a lot of those, they've actually been going to both sides of the plate, but a lot of those have been the left-handed batters. So he's definitely a guy who I think is going to be in play. Again, Colorado is one of the best hitters parks in the league, yields one of the most hits of any park in the league. So I definitely think Grandal is going to be in play, especially if he is hitting up in that 2-hole again. But if he's anywhere in the top 6, I think he's a guy that you have to consider for tonight. Those are basically the 2 guys I've been using most at catcher while making my early lineups. Grandal is the one who you use to save a couple bucks if you want to come down off Russ Martin. But I think both of those guys are in play. I think both of those guys have good lineup placement, and they're 2 of the catchers that I would definitely be rolling out tonight. At first base, we have a lot of options today. Joey Votto is in a good matchup against Hector Noesi. Adrian Gonzalez is in a good matchup against Butler at Coors Field. We just talked about that, Butler and all that, and him giving up a lot of home runs. So you definitely have to think that Gonzalez is in play again. Adam Lind is in a good matchup going up against a right-handed pitcher in that one as well. He's been another guy who's been swinging a pretty hot stick. He's the one left-handed bat on that Milwaukee Brewers team that has been producing against right-handed pitching. So he's definitely somebody who you want to keep in play as well. But for me, the top guy at first base today is going to be Prince Fielder. Now, I know that some of you are probably raising an eyebrow right now, but what would you say if I told you that Prince Fielder right now is hitting 342? He's been a big part of this resurgence for that Texas order. He's batting third, so he's in a prime spot in that real estate. 7-game hitting streak, and he's 10 for his last 27 right now. I mean, basically, this guy has been, one of those bats that has carried that offense to this recent surge that they had. Basically, last year, everybody thought that Detroit ripped them off and got the better end of that Kinsler for Fielder deal. But the way that this guy's swinging the bat right now, I think the jury's still out on that one. That pendulum might switch back to the other way if he keeps hitting like this. Now, he gets to go up against Nathan Carnes. Carnes is a young guy for Tampa Bay. Basically, he's just biding his time until all that Tampa Bay pitching gets healthy. There already is talk that they're going to be sending him back to AAA because he's starting to have some problems with his control. He has the most walks in the major league so far this year, the most wild pitches, and he's also been giving up a ton of home runs. 57 innings worth of pitching so far in the majors. He has 13 home runs that he's allowed. And, I think Fielder's the guy that has a chance to get multiple hits today, and he even has a chance to get into one and send one out. Tampa Bay is not the greatest home run hitter park, but again, it's not it's not the worst one either. It's kind of right in the middle of the pack for it. So Fielder is a guy that I think you can definitely roll today. And the other reason why I like him is his price is cheaper than some of the other guys that we mentioned. Gonzalez is very expensive. Votto's actually a little bit discounted today, but he's still a pretty pricey option. Even Lind, who was the guy that I had been looking down for when I wanted to save, his price is starting to come up when his production as well. So Fielder's a guy who really hasn't had that big price jump yet. I think it's coming. I think it's going to be coming in the next few days, especially if he keeps hitting the way he's hitting. But for now, he's only 3,300 on FanDuel, which I think is very, very reasonable. So he's definitely the guy that I think you can put in your roster, save a little salary, and still have the same kind of upside or more upside than a lot of these other guys. I think he'll go lower owned at first base today, so he'll also give you a little differentiation. But I do think that he's safe, so you can use him in your cash games and you can use him in your tournaments today. First base is never really a position I worry about taking a guy who's too highly owned because there are so many first basemen that are options on any given slate that there's always going to be diversification amongst first basemen. Even if you think your guy's in the perfect matchup and he's the one that everyone's going to be using, a lot of the times he still winds up going off, not more than 20, 25% owned because there are so many first base options and there are so many guys that are in good spots every day at that position. So that's my ideas on first base. That's the way that I see it. Like I said, on a big slate like tonight, there's a lot of options that you can go with, but I think Fielder's the guy that gives you the best combination of salary saving and also upside and safety. Moving on to second base, there are two guys that there's four guys that I'm really looking at, but two that I've been using most often. The one guy is Devon Travis. Travis is the leadoff hitter for the Toronto Blue Jays, goes up against left-handed pitcher Wade Miley up in the Rogers Center. Now, again, as we said the other day, the pricing algorithm has him at different prices on different sites. So take a look at where he's priced, where you're playing. I know on Fantasy Aces, his price has come up huge. On FanDuel, his price has come up huge. But on DraftKings, this is a guy who's still 3,300 on DraftKings. Now, he's got 7 home runs batting in that leadoff spot. He's got some big bats hitting behind him. He's been hitting the ball well. I think his average is still over 300 at this point. And for 3,300, you can do a lot worse. If you look at the punts that you can take, the cheap options that you can take at some other positions for that same price tag, Travis has a lot more upside than a bunch of those other guys. So if you're playing on DraftKings and you need a second baseman, a salary-saving guy who has upside for you, and also is pretty safe that you can roll out in both GPPs and cash, I think Devon Travis is definitely one of those guys you got to look at. Now, if you're playing on FanDuel, the guy who I have been rolling out in all my lineups early today for second base is Jimmy Paredes. Now, Jimmy Paredes' week might be over. This guy's not averaging double-digit points anymore like he was for that 6 or 7 day stretch where he was on a tear. But if you look at his numbers from this year and even go back and look at his numbers from last year, he hits the ball very well against right-handed pitching. If you throw a right-handed pitcher on the mound and he gets the bat, he's a switch hitter, but when he's hitting from the left side, that's really his preferred split. That's where he really wants it. So he gets a good matchup today, has a chance. I mean, he's cooled off, but, basically they've moved from Citi Field where he wasn't hitting the ball really well. But then again, who does hit the ball really well in Citi Field? And they're over at Yankee Stadium now where, it's a much, much friendlier hitter park. It's got that short porch that he can aim for with his left-handed swing. So I definitely think there's a lot of upside to using a guy like Jimmy Paredes today, especially on FanDuel and especially at a price of only $2,900. Second base is a place that I'm trying to save money today. If you guys haven't realized, I'm not paying up for some of the big studs, but there are two other guys who I think might be in play. One of them is DJ Matthew from the Colorado Rockies. He's a guy who just hits the ball. He's a hits machine. He doesn't have a ton of power, but he just constantly gets on base, constantly gets hits. The thing I don't like is he's buried down there in that Colorado Rockies order, but I expect the Rockies to put up a good number today, especially against a guy like Brett Anderson, who's going for the LA Dodgers. Anderson's a lefty, kind of struggles with those right-handed bats. So I think that there's going to be a lot of hits in that game. So I definitely think he's in play. And the last guy I want to mention is Scooter Gennett. Scooter Gennett is a left-handed batter going up against a right-handed pitcher. He homered yesterday. When he's hitting in the two hole a lot of the time now for the Brewers, and as a left-handed bat hitting in the two hole, he's hitting in front of guys like Ryan Braun, like Adam Lynn. So if they keep him up in that two hole today, in that lefty-righty matchup, I definitely think he's another guy that's in play, especially because his salary is so cheap. So there's 4 options that we gave you at second base today. Depending on what site you're playing on, those are 4 guys that we've been looking at. And, they're all kind of cheap. They all help you save some salary because there's a couple guys that we're going to get into now that are very expensive, but are guys that we think you should have in your lineup. Third base, there are basically 4 guys I'm using. 2 of them are very expensive. That's Nolan Arenado. We already discussed the left-hander going up for the Dodgers. Arenado's back home in Coors Field. Definitely a good matchup for him. Lefty-righty splits. Home in Coors Field, hitter's ballpark, going up against a guy like Brett Anderson, who's a bit of a gas can for the Dodgers. Basically the only thing that's going to pull me off of Arenado today is going to be the weather. If that game looks like it's not going to go, then I'm going to have to make a swerve. But otherwise, if I can fit Arenado in my rosters, I definitely think he's a guy that you want to have some exposure to today. If I do have to come off of him, the easy swerve for me to make, and another guy who I really like, is Josh Donaldson. Donaldson, again, gets a matchup with Wade Miley up there in the Rogers Center in Toronto. Right-handed bat who absolutely smashes the ball against left-handed pitching. That's basically how he made his name. He was the guy in Oakland last year that, dominated the left-handed pitchers. He batted third in that lineup against lefties. They dropped him down to 6th and switched him with, Brandon Moss when they went up against righties because Moss absolutely smashes right-handed pitching as a lefty. And, that's basically where Donaldson's bread and butter is basically smashing home runs against left-handed pitching. So you give him a guy like Wade Miley. Again, Miley's been a little bit tougher on righties than he has been on lefties, but he does give up a lot of home runs. A lot of those home runs have come to batters from the right side of the plate. They're playing in the Rogers Center, which is a good hitter's ballpark. Rogers Center gives up a lot of home runs to right-handed batters. So a lot of things are checking off in his favor today. And, that's a high over-under game. So I definitely think there's going to be some runs there. Donaldson likely will be hitting second in that order, which is where they've had him lately. I'm kind of almost hoping that Joey Bats sits today because he hasn't really looked right. So then this way Donaldson, can kind of drop down to that 3rd spot in the order, give him a few more RBI opportunities. But he's definitely another guy that I think is in play. 2 other guys that you can look at, you got Beltre going up against Carnes. As we said, Carnes has been giving up a lot of home runs. That Texas order has been getting hot. So Adrian Beltre is another guy you can look there. And if you're looking for somebody to save money on, if you're playing on FanDuel, Yangervis Solarte is only $2,200. He's going up against Jeremy Hellickson. It's a pretty good matchup for him. He hits pretty well from the left side. Hellickson's a right-hander. So it's not the greatest situation in the world, but if you're looking for a salary saver, I don't think Solarte is the worst guy you could put in your lineup. So that basically is my ideas for third base. Now, shortstop, there are two guys. The first guy I'm going to mention is Ian Desmond. Desmond goes up against Eric Stoltz. Stoltz is a left-hander who gives up a lot of home runs to right-handed batters. Ian Desmond is the right-handed bat on Washington that led them in home runs against lefties last year. He already has one against the left-hander this year in like 18 or 20 at-bats. Not a very small sample size. But Desmond has some pop, and he does have some pop against left-handed pitching. Stoltz is a guy that gives up a lot of home runs, so it all kind of fits together for him there. And I give you Ian Desmond, but I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I probably won't have much of him unless that Rockies game gets canceled, because the play of the day to me today is Troy Tulowitzki. Okay? Troy Tulowitzki is going up against a left-handed pitcher at home in Coors Field. I mean, I don't even really have to expand on it anymore. Left-handed pitcher, Tulowitzki, at home in Coors, you put him in your roster. It doesn't matter what his price is. And let me explain to you guys the reason why. Here's a stat that is basically the reason why I'm going to be using Tulo. He hit 318 against lefties in 2013. He had 397 against lefties last season. This year, he is, 7 for 14 with the home run and an on-base plus slugging percentage of 1.286. So if you look back at his slugging percentage from the last 2 years, in 2014 against lefties, his on-base plus slugging was 1.384. If you go back to 2013, it was 1.008. Now, for those of you who don't follow the stat, what that basically means is every time he gets up to the plate, this year he's averaging 1.26 bases per plate appearance. Last year against left-handers, 1.38 bases per plate appearance, and 2 years ago it was 1.008. So statistically, you are better off walking Troy Tulowitzki every single time he gets up to the plate than you are pitching to him if you're a left-handed pitcher. And those numbers are even higher when he's at home in Coors Field. So pitching to this guy as a left-handed pitcher in Coors Field makes absolutely no sense. You're statistically better off just walking him every single time he gets up to the plate. So if that's the case, and they do decide to walk him every time he gets up, he's going to get you 4 or 5 points over on FanDuel today for that price of, $5,100. If they do decide to pitch to him today, he should be getting you even more than 4 points based off of the stats that he has here. Now, again, nothing's a guarantee, but when you have a guy who hits left-handed pitching that well, playing in a ballpark that's hitter-friendly, you basically just roster him and move on. It's not even worth it to get too crazy about it. Troy Tulowitzki, for me, is the play of the day. As long as that game does not get rained out, find a way to get him into your lineup. You'll thank me later. So that's my ideas on shortstop for the day. We're going to move on to outfield. Now, if you are going to try to put some of these guys that we mentioned, some of these expensive first base, shortstop, third base options into your lineup, you're going to need a couple cheap outfielders. One guy who I really like is Kevin Kiermaier. He is still minimum priced over on FanDuel. He's leading off for the Rays, hit a home run yesterday, has a good splits matchup he has a good splits matchup again today against Giovanni Gallardo. Gallardo's a guy who's an equal opportunity home run allower. That means he's given up a ton of home runs, and he's given them up to righties, lefties. I mean, it doesn't really matter. He just serves them up one way or another. Kiermaier has some power. He can hit for average. He's hitting on top of that Rays order. Now, again, that Rays order is nothing special. I don't expect them to pound out 13 or 14 runs, but hitting on top of it means he's going to get an extra at-bat or two here or there. So he's definitely a guy that's in play. And again, if you're trying to fit in a Tulo at 5,100, you're going to need a guy like Kiermaier at 2,200 to fit in there to make that work. Now, again, I've been a big proponent of these Texas bats lately. They've been doing really well. So another outfielder who I'm on, another guy you can save some money on, is Kyle Blanks. Blanks has been hitting 5th in that order right now. He's a right-handed bat, getting a left-handed pitcher. He's been very hot. Again, Carnes is a guy. Oh, I'm sorry, he gets a right-hander in Carnes, but Carnes has been giving up home runs to guys on both sides of the plate, so it doesn't really matter. That's the stat that we were talking about before, 13 home runs and 57 major league innings so far. He's a guy who's not going to be in the league for very long. As soon as that Rays staff gets healthy, he's going back down to AAA to get a little more seasoning. And home runs has been something he struggled with so far his entire career. He's been, had a cup of coffee with the Rays for the last 3 seasons, and every time they call him up, home runs has been one of the big issues with him. So Kyle Blanks is a guy that fits nicely into that position today, and I think he can give you another pretty high upside game. Especially if you're linking him cheap with a guy like Prince Fielder, you're going to have a lot of power in the middle of that Texas order. and you're going to be able to cover a lot of that. The last guy I'm going to talk about is Joc Pederson. And if you don't know about this guy yet, you need to wake up. 7 home runs in his last 10 games. I mean, basically all this guy does is hit home runs. His batted ball exit speed is pretty much one of the best in the league, slightly behind Hanley Ramirez, who, as we mentioned last week, is basically hitting rockets off his bat. Right now, they get a matchup in Coors Field going up against Eddie Butler. Eddie Butler's allowed a .319 batting average to left-handed batters in 2014. This year, he's allowed a .423 batting average to left-handed batters, giving up a couple home runs. And basically, during the last 10 days, Joc Pederson has been averaging 5.5 fantasy points per game. So even though his price has jumped pretty high, he's 4,800 on FanDuel. I think he's over 5,000 today on DraftKings. With the return that this guy has been giving you and the way he's been playing, as long as he stays hot, he's a guy that fits in your lineup. Again, he's going up in Coors Field today, has a great matchup. Definitely going to be a guy that I think you should have in your lineup. So that gives you some ideas of some of the outfielders that were on. Guys like Gerardo Power, Mike Trout. Those are some other guys that just barely missed making the list. But there's a lot of outfield options you can use today. And speaking of all those options, we're going to get in real quick to our cornerstones and how we're building our lineups today. So, Josh, do you want to let the people know who you're going to be building around?
Yeah, Matt Harvey's the first guy at all my lineups today, especially 50-50s and head-to-heads. I think he's the guy with the highest upside and highest ceiling or highest floor as well, rather. I like him because, especially in these 50-50s and head-to-heads, even if he doesn't have a great game, which I think is very unlikely, a lot of other people will have him, so it's not a big risk to put him out there. But if he has a great game, which the chances are he does, and you don't have him, you could be on the wrong side of the cash line. In order to fit him and a guy like Trevor Bauer, who I think will be my second pitcher on DraftKings, I will need some cheap bats like Scooter Gennett, like a Billy Burns if he hits in the top of that order. I do like Tulo as well. I think he's the play of the day. I agree with you, especially at shortstop at a position where, other than him, there's not too much to go for, especially with Desmond being moved around in that order, as Eric just said in one of the chats. But in order to fit those top 2 pitchers that I'm going to be targeting, and Harvey and Bauer, you're going to need some cheap bats, and you're going to have to wait till some of those lineups come out. But I think Jeanette's going to be my top value pick, especially if he hits second. What are you doing for your lineups, Benny?
Well, basically, I mean, you guys know I love Tulowitzki today, so I'm starting my lineups on whatever site I'm playing by putting Tulo in and then trying to make it work. Other guys that I mentioned that I'm on, I really like Prince Fielder today. He's been giving me some of that savings that I need to make Tulo fit. Where I could fit in the Joc Pederson, I'm using him because he's just been red hot. Guy's got so much upside because basically all he does is hit home runs. They used to joke in the NFL that all Chris Carter did was catch touchdown passes. Well, all this guy Pederson does is hit home runs. So if you want to crack on him for it, I'll just keep taking the 14 points he gets me on DraftKings every time he does it. Using a lot of guys like Kiermaier and Paredes, Scooter Gennett, guys like that in order to fit in some of these big studs. I really like Matt Harvey today, but I also really like Francisco Liriano and Gio Gonzalez. Those are the 3 guys that I basically have been using in all my lineups. Harvey's a little expensive for me today with some of the bats that I want to put in. So on the 2 pitcher sites, I found myself with a lot of Liriano, a lot of Gio Gonzalez, a little bit of Sonny Gray mixed in there too. I really like this kid. I like the way he pitches, and I think he has some upside as well. It's a little pricey on DraftKings, so I think I've been using him more in other spots. But yeah, I mean, that's basically it. You got to get some of these big bats that you really like in there. And in order to do that, you're going to have to find some value. So I will be looking at lineups when lineups come out, just like I think all you guys should. If you see somebody who's batting higher in the order than they normally do, somebody that has a good matchup, hitting in a good park, playing against a pitcher who's a gas can, those are the guys that you want to try to put in your roster to get some of those, cheap spots out of the way. So get some salary savings so you can fit into guys like Tulo and some of the big pitchers. I mean, there's a lot of big pitchers today. So you can't, I don't think it's a day where you want to be fading pitching and going for some of the cheap options and hoping that the studs blow up. 1 or 2 of these guys up top, 1 or 2 of these stud pitchers are going to blow up, but there's a lot of other ones that are going to be absolutely fine. And you're going to be in a tough spot if basically on a day where there's a small slate, if you want to fade like an Arrieta or an Archer and hope that guy blows up, it can work out for you. But if you're going to fade top price pitching today, you're fading 4 or 5 guys, and all 4 or 5 of those guys are not going to blow up. So you definitely have to pick the right ones. And, for me, I'm hoping that's Liriano and Gio and, Harvey and Gray. So those are the guys I'm going to be trying to build around. But that's basically it. Hopefully we can make some money again tonight.
Yeah, no doubt. That brings us to the end of the show. You heard it here. Spend on pitching, find those value bats, and let's make some money tonight. First of all, I want everybody to have a great weekend. Be sure to find your mothers. Give us Happy Mother's Day. It's a big weekend for that. Don't forget those mother-in-laws, too. That's a big thing. I know personally Benny's got to do some of that. I'm going to have to do some of that as well. So what we're going to do here is we will see you on Tuesday, May 12th, I believe it is, at noon. For Benny Ricciardi, I'm Josh Kalachi. This has been The Curve. Make sure that you guys get your lineups in. It's going to be a big slate tonight. All 15 games at 7 o'clock. Take it easy, guys.
That's it. Stay classy, DFS. Thanks. We love you, and good luck tonight.